back to where it was. And here we go.
Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of Gans processing. Such information is not meant to... Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of Gans processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, Alex. Let's turn it over to you now. I want to welcome Alex Skorik, as he's been teaching in Mexico, Brazil, Italy, the United States, and has spread his fields across the planet. And we all support all of the teachers in the Keshe Foundation. Thank you, Alex, for joining us today.
Welcome, everybody. Beautiful Sunday afternoon. Very historic time in our universe, in our little tiny perfect little universe, which is very tiny, and we are looking to broaden our horizons. So I want to thank everybody for being here. This is part of the North American team meeting, but we have a tremendous representation from the international community, and I want to welcome everybody here. We hope to get more badges up on this plate here, but yes, we are part of the North American Plasma Education Series, and so this is a presentation of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. It is plasma science, and we moved into what are called intermediate understanding, and this is the last of the series. It's Gans of Oxygeno. And my name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is August the 1st, 2021. So we have tried, and starting with the impetus from the Brazilian community, last October, we started basic teaching, and we moved into intermediate teaching and advanced teaching, but all of this teaching was really very basic teaching. And so we've taken the journey to review this. And we call it basic understanding. And we went through half a dozen classes, and we just come to a point where we had to move on. And so we've gone into intermediate understanding. And we've kind of come to the end of that rope as well. But we've had a lot of intense discussions, and mainly because the Knowledge Seekers workshops are going into further knowledge. So how can we as knowledge seekers and teachers of other knowledge seekers, how can we bridge this phenomenal workload where we have over 3,000 hours of teachings in the archives, and we're moving ahead at such a rapid pace? How can we bridge this to the new knowledge seekers? And I want to welcome, there are new faces in the audience, and I want to welcome these new knowledge seekers, because this is what's going to be happening in a much larger scale, because knowledge seekers become truth seekers, and as truth seekers become aware, then they become teachers, and we need more teachers. And this is the point. One of the things that we are trying to figure out is to understand nanotechnology and Gans, but we see that in the last couple of months, we've been moving beyond that. And so what I like to do is to try and figure out where some of the terminology has been deficient. If we don't have the proper terminology, it's very difficult to communicate, isn't it? And still to this day, we are still using the wrong words in the wrong context. So we have to repeat and review, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's all part of the learning experience. But what we need to do is to really be a little bit more diligent in the use of our words. And the part of the problem is that we have two sciences. One science is the science of science, which we call physics, which is just one of the many different sciences. But we have used words and we've carried forward these words. And we know we've had a problem with the word matter, for instance. But then we have spiritual science, and we have a tremendous amount of confusion there as well. And so this deficiency between the two sciences has really magnified itself. And we have a few other terminologies that are a real problem. So what I would really like to do is to review Gans state, because we've kind of exposed a very serious problem. And the reason for this problem is because we had to understand the relationship between magnetic and gravitational fields and how the energy is moving. And of course, energy is always positive. So the charge of the energy is not the energy, but the direction of flow. And the dimensions and geometries that it goes through, and how it picks and chooses which geometry and dimension it goes through is determined by susceptibility. And this susceptibility has different kinds of dynamism and different kinds of strength. And one of those strengths is associated with gradients. Another is associated with field strengths, or shall we say, different plasma states. And so this is what we've tried to do. And we're still in the basics. So even though this is intermediate teaching, we'd like to kind of, shall we say, close the loop on this, because that's how matters are created. It's created with a rotating field. And to maintain this field, you have to close the loop. And so in book number 1, we see the universal order of creation. And I try and divide that into two titles, because it's also the universal order of matter. And so we have the creation of matter and the universal order of creation. And this is all plasma science. And when we say plasma, it refers to all the energy states. And when we say to matter, it refers to all the energy states. So plasma matter is generic, just like if I say car. And this is the problem. When I say car, everyone in the audience will have a different vision in their mind. So how do we clarify that? And so the point is, we have to know where we are. We have to know where we're going, and we have to connect somehow. And so this has been outlined in the structure of the light as outlined in book number 2. And we're still talking about plasma science. And it's not so much what we're talking about as what we're not talking about. And what we're not talking about is the manifestation. Because what we want to talk about is, how is the universe created? And so fundamentally, the universe exists from energy. And as this energy is always in motion, and it has a direction and has a field strength, so it has a charge. And so not only when we discuss the basic energy, where we see the creation of 3 matters, matter, antimatter, and dark matter, but we also have the interaction of matters. And Each of these plasma matters is a function and a collective of matter, antimatter, and dark matter. Both are the same, and both interact. And it is this interaction and our understanding of this interaction which is kind of keeping us away from going into the advanced science. So to understand principal matter, the energy is flowing through the universe, and we call that PM ticks. This is energy that is flowing without really a direction, but it's looking for a force field to interact. And once it finds that, and it can create a balance, we call that a maggrav, and that's the essence of creation. Now, what is our point of view with respect to this? And so we're finding that we have many different points of view. And which one is the correct point of view? Well, it all depends on the scheme. It all depends on your point of view. It all depends on your intention. And it all depends on your soul motivation. So let's just go back to creation. And so the fundamental model of nuclear decay is the neutron. And in the decay process, the neutron becomes a proton in the atom. And for the new knowledge seekers, I want to apologize. We're using some terms that we've already discussed and may not be known to you, maybe new words, because it just doesn't matter for your environment that you're in. But please understand that when we're doing these discussions, there are relationships. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to set up relationships and try and set up comparisons, and to understand that regardless of which dimension we're talking about, the energy flow follows a set of rules. And so we have something that is created into something else, and in the process, there's a cost. And this cost is a release of PM ticks. So these PM ticks are the fundamental particles. They are energy packs. And as they go through the universe, they are looking for partners. And when they find a partner that is compatible, they start to interact and they form a little dance. And that is the beginning of creation. So here we have on the right-hand side, two dimensions, an X and a Y axis, which is an interacting of say 2 PM ticks, but that's a fake picture because we have to determine the strength as well. So this is now introducing the Z axis, which is a third dimension. So we have an X axis, Y axis, and a Z axis, which is a manifestation of the PM ticks in motion. And interestingly enough, we are none of these three dimensions. And this is the problem. So if we look at energy in motion, and we see that it's everywhere. So what is this motion representing? It is representing the currency of the universe. So we understand in our society that money is the currency. So you buy something, it costs money. So you pay the money, that's the transaction currency. But in the universe, energy is the transaction currency. But you see, the energy is bountiful, the energy is everywhere. And so the energy is not only the transaction currency, but also the plasma fuel of energy in motion. And so fortunately, it wasn't left up to us, because if it was, I don't think we'd have such a tiny perfect world. You see, because the world, and this is a representation of our world, just representing the field. So we have an equator, we have the North and South Pole, and we have the fields that go around it. And this is our representing of our plasma state. And now we know that we can also do a nano and a Gans state, which are higher energy states, and do this on this planet. We don't have to leave this planet to do this. And as we find our planet is a balanced position, and thank God for that, because of the mess we're creating. So the Earth is taking care of business, and then it is a magrav. But we find that the creation of the nanostate is a magrav, the creation of the Gans state is a magrav, and then we find that the PM ticks, which are coming in all different directions, are also individual magravs. But here's the scene. If we say car, what is the mental construct that you have of a car? And so the same problem applies to PM ticks. What is the mental construct that you have of the PM tick? So the answer is that they're not all the same. They're all in different flavors. They're all in different field strengths. And then not only in different field strengths and in unique field strengths, but they come and they keep coming. So there's not just two PM ticks, but the two forces that come together have supporting forces. And it is these supporting forces that come and build this substructure. So when we build it up, not only are supporting forces coming in and following the path that we've outlined, but other supporting forces are joining in. And so you could say that this is a party. And as this party starts to develop, and it takes a life of its own, and this is the beginning of plasma. And many of us have ideas. And what the idea is the seed for another plasma. And so this is how dynamic plasma is created. When we create a dynamic field, and then we interact with another plasma field, and there is an interaction point, and it is from these points that we interact. So this is kind of the same representation as the previous neutron model. And we could say that we have this neutron model here in this star formation that we're seeing. This is a representation of a star formation, and except that it's in a pyramidal form. And it is interacting with a basic, shall we say, proton and electron type of configuration. And there's an interaction point, and so that is the attraction point. So when we're looking at plasma science, we have to understand that it has magnetical forces. And those magnetical forces, so we created this field, this dance, and inside this field, we attracted more energy, and therefore gives us a structure where we have, from that structure, the ability to give and take energy. And then the question becomes, give to where and take from where? Because if we only give and take from ourselves, then we're just like a dog chasing its tail. And that is pretty funny. And it's pretty funny when a dog does that. But is it funny when humans do that? Yeah, to a certain extent. But, you know, we're in August, and it's been 20 months since we've had a pandemic, and the people who are paid to look after business are failing. And it's because they don't understand the magnetical aspect of the electron, which is a combination of matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And then we look at the neutron, and we say it's gravitational, and it is a construct of matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And for some people, a lot of people can't see the difference. And I just don't understand that. You see, because one is magnetical and one is gravitational. So I put them together here so you can see the difference. And we have other similarities in life, let's say round magnets. And so here we have two magnets. We don't know which charge they have, but we can guess. And these are attached together. So they must be opposite charges. So I decided to scrunch up the towel that they sit on and hold them together forcibly, and then release them, and look what happens. They pop apart. Well, where did that energy come from? I swear to God, I didn't do this. So they did this. And so there are energies at work here that we can't see. These energy forces we call repulsion. How far did they repel? The towel is relaxed a bit, but it isn't flat. because something stopped this repulsion from working. And that's attraction. So there are two field forces here. So this is what happens when we build dimensions. We have a point, we add a second point, and we connect it. The distance between these 2 points is determined not only by repulsion, but also by attraction. And to maintain this field, because energy is always in motion, we have to send it through a rotating field. That's our x-axis. And that is only the one aspect we find. We also have a y-axis, which goes through the poles. But does it just go through the poles? We're going to discuss that more today. And then we have the z-axis, which tells us how big this is. Okay, but that's only half the picture. So we have to bring in another half. And if these halves are the same, then they will repel. So we have to flip things over so that we have an attraction. And so what we have here is an action we call attraction, which is complementing the repulsion. And so both of these fields are working together. Where are they working? So in other words, let's review this terminology. So we said the x-axis is rotation, so that involves transmission. The y-axis involves polarity, so that involves transition. Okay, so we have those two things. So now we're going to develop a field strength, and that's the z-axis. And we call that transmutation. Transmutation of what? So I say transmutation, and so one thought gets into your mind. But I could say transmission, and you could say one thought gets in your mind there. So one of the things about transmission, it could be the transmission of electricity along telephone poles, along the wires that are between the telephone poles, right? So the word is generic. So let's be a little bit more specific. So when we say transmutation, we have two types of transmutation that we want to focus on. One is transformation and the other is transportation. And why is that? Well, because this field strength is a plasma core and it has a position. And in order to maintain that position or to have a reposition, it has to interact with another dynamic plasma. Or shall we say, interact with another plasma core. It is the interaction of these two plasmas which creates a dynamic plasma. And that's where the dynamism comes in. So there has to be some kind of movement. There has to be some kind of positioning. And so there has to be some kind of vehicle to facilitate this positioning. And so this vehicle is represented by a field. The vehicle is the field, and the field is manifested, and we call that transmutation. But what kind of transmutation? There's a transformation from px into a field strength, and then there's another transformation into something we call transportation. And all of this has come up because of energy is in motion. And so energy in motion carries a charge and it goes through various dimensions. Well, you know what? We have soul dimensions and we have emotional dimensions. And we know that as an emotion, we can do a creation and a co-creation. Or we can do the same thing with the soul dimensions. But we're stuck on Earth here. And in our Earth range, we are looking at different energy levels. And we can transcend these various energy levels without leaving the range of Earth. And so we discussed those in more detail, and we identified the various plasma states. So we found that the small m matter state, and I said this is where the confusion comes in, and compared it to the capital M matter state. But we find that the small m matter state is the lowest energy, and it is physical, and this capital M matter state is not physical. But we have other things like nanostate and Gans state, and today we're talking about the Gans of oxygen, and then we have plasma states, and then in between we have these other transfer states. Okay, so that's a good way to organize the states, because as we progress, each state is of a higher field strength. By which point of view are we talking about? So the conclusion that we've come to is that we're upside down. We have to understand that the plasma state is the higher state. And as such, the higher state is the gravitational state. And as such, the energy state that we call small m matter state is the lowest. And so therefore that is the magnetical state. So we've kind of been looking at the way we transcend these various ranges kind of upside down. And the reason for that is because there are energy states that we cannot see. And so for the majority of us, if we can't see it, it doesn't exist. And so we find that there's a point in between where we do this transformation. So the transformation is a result of the transmutation from the, shall we say, the plasma state into the physical state. So just to clarify one other point of confusion, all of these states are plasma states. So we're just going to specifically talk about, when we say plasma state, we're going to be talking about non-tangible, non-visible. So in other words, antimatter. And the combination of antimatter with dark matter, and that combination with the capital M matter. Okay, so that's on the right-hand side of the picture. You go back to the left-hand side of the picture, and we have Gans state, which is physical, and nanostate, which is physical, and small m matter state, which is physical. And so, okay, well, from the top to the down, there is an interchange point, and that's your transformation point. But from the left to the right, somewhere, somehow, we're making another transformation. And so that is the discussion that we had with respect to inertia. The inertia is the interaction of the plasma state with the physical state. And somehow, some way, we've created our beautiful little Earth here. And in this Earth, we can go from the ground to the sky. Okay, so that when we go from the ground to the sky, we call that a transition range, right? Because we're cutting lines of force. If we go along the lines of force, we call that a transmission range. So we find obstacles in our transmission range. And these obstacles we call mountain ranges. So if we are in North America, we could say, well, we have the Rocky Mountains on the left, and we have the Swiss Alps on the right. And so if we start on the West Coast and we climb over the Rocky Mountains, and then we come down across the Atlantic Ocean and then climb up the Swiss Alps and go to the other side, well, you know what? There's another range even beyond that, is the Himalayan range. And that's even higher. So there are ranges of different heights, okay? So the different heights are gradients. And so as we cut across these heights, these flux lines run along the surface of the Earth. So as we go up and down, we actually cut across these flux lines. That's why it's called transition. And so how rapid is the cutting is determined by the steepness. So the steeper the slope, the higher or the faster, shall we say, is the transition. And the transition in plasma science, the higher energy goes to the lower energy, or we say the positive feeds the negative, and then the negative goes somewhere, and we don't know where it goes. And the point is that the energy flows, and as it cuts lines, it's transition. As it goes along the lines, it's transmission. Okay, so that's your X and Y axis right there. And why this is important is because a long time ago, we talked about Gans motion, and a lot of people still don't understand this. And the point is here is that we understand that going to the bottom is going towards gravity. Okay, well, we're looking at Gans in motion, and we have here a representation of a Gans particle inside a cup that is filled with water. And so all we have is two things here. I'm not saying which Gans, I'm just saying there's a Gans that is filled with water. We shake the water up and the Gans is all over the place. The Gans starts to move and it gradually moves down. And so there's a reason for that, but it doesn't just drop like a stone. It moves slowly. And what it's doing, because Gans is exchanging energy, in other words, it's giving and taking. So in order to move, it has to drop an energy and pick up an energy. It has to do this systematically so that it maintains its Maggraff condition. It is, in fact, a catalytic converter because it's non-consuming. It is giving and taking an energy. And the environment that is giving and taking the energy in is the water. So in some cases, we actually see Gans kind of rising. And in other cases, it's settling down. But given over enough time, we find that eventually it sorts itself out. And so the speed of the motion is determined by the gradient. So that motion is a gradient transition. And the steepness and how fast it comes down is the transition gradient. Sounds like double talk. Well, we should be used to double talk by now, shouldn't we? The point is that Gans has an affinity. And fundamentally, Gans is highly reactive, right? We know that Gans is a superconductor at room temperature. So in order to be a superconductor, it has to be highly reactive. And it reacts to emission spectra. So there's energy that is being emitted from somewhere, and the Gans reacts to that energy. It reacts to that energy by absorbing it. Gans facilitates absorption. What energy is it absorbing? It's not absorbing physical energy. It's absorbing plasma energy. Gans is a natural lie detector. Gans is a natural love detector. So by extension, Gans is a natural communicator. And plants have learned this lesson very, very well. So they understand surface to volume ratios. They understand how from a seed they can grow into a plant. The plant has a flower, and the flower transmutates into these particles, energy packs, which the wind can carry so that they can start a new plant and grow and create, or create and grow. So create, co-create, and procreate. And these plants, of course, are on Earth. This is a dandelion, and it is made of protein. Where did that protein come from? So then we got into amino acids, and we found that the fundamental amino acid is made from carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Now, what's interesting about this, first of all, it's put in this sequence so we can remember it as a name. So Mr. Kesh likes to call it Mr. Cohn, C-O-H-N. So you remember the four components of the amino acids. But what's interesting is that they're all gases. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. These are in a gaseous state. And what kind of gaseous state? So we look at the periodic table of elements, and we see that each of these elements, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, have a corresponding number. And so because energy is always in motion, these elements are made from energy. And so the fundamental energy that we've seen from the decay of the neutron is hydrogen. And so the combination of all of these elements is actually hydrogen. They're all hydrogen. So we find that carbon, for instance, is hydrogen 6, and nitrogen is hydrogen 7, and oxygen is hydrogen 8. And this is really handy because it's kind of like an arithmetic sequencing, very, very easy. But, you know, it gets kind of unwieldy to name them all hydrogen and a number. So we give them unique names like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. So it makes it kind of a little bit more interesting. But the combination of these four elements together create an amino acid. And then these amino acids combine. And when we have three amino acids, they fold over. And when they fold over, they create protein. So how do we get to that point? You know, so let's go back and see where we're starting from. And so we say, well, there's a changing of the elements. And this changing of the elements is coming from transmutation. And where does this start from? And so there's a transmutation from the plasma, which is non-physical, to the physical, which is visible. And so there's a transmutation to get into the Earth's domain. And the Earth's domain is working in conjunction with the domain of the sun. So the domain of the sun is the plasma field. The domain of the Earth is the plasma field. And the interaction of those two fields creates the focal point. So it is as this focal point that we see the beginning of life on this planet. So when we look at the individual components of the amino acid, and we've talked about this before, but we're reviewing it again today. If we say nitrogen is hydrogen 7, and then if we add another hydrogen, then we can get oxygen, which is hydrogen 8. So hydrogen 7 plus 1 hydrogen is hydrogen 8. Okay, well, that works. But what happens when we minus a hydrogen? Well, we find that the nitrogen being hydrogen 7 minus a hydrogen becomes hydrogen 6, and we find hydrogen 6 is carbon. Okay, so there's a relationship between the nitrogen, and adding a hydrogen becomes oxygen, and nitrogen subtracting a hydrogen becomes carbon. And so now we understand why nitrogen is 81% of the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is full of air. And it is this air that we breathe. And so we say that we breathe in oxygen. And oxygen always comes in pairs. So we say oxygen is O2. And so we breathe oxygen, but we exhale carbon dioxide, which is CO2. Well, something's wrong here because hydrogen is missing. Where's the hydrogen? It's gone. So something's happened in the air. And so we find that way up in the magnetosphere, we have a plasmatic nitrogen. Is the plasmatic nitrogen different from the nitrogen that we see in the periodic table of elements? Well, yes, it is, because the periodic table of elements are the physical elements. And there's a difference between the physical manifestation and the plasmatic manifestation. So we're talking about the plasma nitrogen, and it interacts and has been created from hydrogen. And so we have a construct of NH4, which interestingly enough, no carbon and no oxygen. And then somehow we've created an amino acid which has all four. So the suspect here is the nitrogen. It looks like the nitrogen is changing into oxygen and carbon. And so we have all four. So this is the beginning of the creation of energy packs on this planet. So we have a plasmatic nitrogen, and we have a plasmatic hydrogen, and it comes together as a plasmatic amino acid. And so this is the essence of protein building. So forward down the line, we see that the proteins form a star formation. So this is another part of the basic teaching that we talked about, the star formation and how that works. But what was wrong with this picture is that they were all the same field strength. So we have to change this picture around to have a representation of the different field strengths. And so by the plasma rules, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So in this case, the oxygen is the biggest. It's oxygen 8, so it feeds the other 3. And then, of course, the next one is nitrogen 7, so it feeds the remaining 2. And then, of course, there's the third one, which is carbon, and it only has one that's weaker, so it feeds the hydrogen. So the hydrogen is laughing all the way to the bank here because it's getting fed by the other 3. And so there's the interaction of all these fields. And so we have the building of the amino star. It is from the amino acid, which is the precursor to the DNA. So we understand the sequence. And there's a condition here where we have actually 2 NAs. One's a DNA, one's the RNA. And so we find that the DNA is kind of a physical representation of this hardwiring, whereas the RNA is a non-physical representation. So it, in fact, is an unprinted circuit board. So one's printed, one is unprinted. And how does this happen? And what is the interaction with it? And how can you have one physical, one non-physical interacting? And are we only talking about the physical aspect? Are we assuming that when we look at the RNA, that there is no plasmatic RNA, and are we doing the same thing with the DNA and assuming that there's no plasmatic DNA? So what are we saying? That it's only physical? Well, this is the problem, you see, because in the plasma science, the higher feeds the weaker. And so we've seen the pattern where we feed 3, then we feed 2, then we feed 1. And we go through this, and then we find that there's an affinity for each of the components within the amino acid. It's the nitrogen that's the facilitator. And the hydrogen is moving all over the place, right? It's energy in motion, and it's looking for a place to go. So it's magnetical. And the carbon is somehow connecting between the 2 fields. What I'm talking about, these fields represented by the non-physical plasma and the tangible physical. And so we see that the oxygen becomes gravitational. Well, this is kind of interesting. Well, oxygen being very gravitational because it has a greater density, but we find that in the upper atmosphere, that oxygen is called ozone. And so somehow that oxygen, it's O3, is in the upper atmosphere. And here we have oxygen at the ground level, which is in the lower atmosphere. So let's go back to the neutron, shall we? Because there's a point here that I want to make. We've seen the round magnets sitting on the towel there, and we found that they repelled. And they repelled to a certain point that they attracted. So there's a balance between the repulsion and the attraction. But this field that we can't see is only there when the magnets are there. So if we take the magnets away, this magnetic field disappears. This is what happens when you have lower energy. You cannot sustain this plasmatic condition. So you can only sustain the form artifact of this plasmatic condition, which is the physicality. But the plasmatic condition is only maintained when you're in a dynamic plasma reactor, because a dynamic plasma reactor also has a magnetical field that emits and absorbs. And in a dynamic plasma reactor, if you remove the reactor, the magnetic field remains. And so this is a good thing, because if I have an idea and I give you an idea, I don't have a hole in my head. I can give you an idea without losing my physicality. I can give you love without losing my heart. This is a good thing. So the energy is transmitted through dynamism. And so when we look at the division of the neutron, we find that the neutron itself is a dynamic plasma reactor. And we've seen that the neutron divides into a proton-electron combination. And there's a residual. And this residual is the PM ticks. And what's left is a proton-electron combination of hydrogen. The neutron is absent in the hydrogen. So we find that there's things, and then there's things missing. So in this case, we have to pay attention to what's missing, because when we look at the absence of the neutron, so the absence of the neutron comes from the division of the neutron. But we know that the electron is a self-contained maggrav, right? When we say self-contained maggrav, that means it has matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And you know what? The proton is a self-contained maggrav, which means it has matter, antimatter, and dark matter. Okay, so I want you to see that pattern there. And the thing about the proton and electron is they link together like a marriage. And there is a physical electron-proton marriage, which we call hydrogen, but there is hydrogen in a plasmatic condition as well. And hydrogen is magnetical. And so whether it's in a physical condition or in a plasmatic condition, hydrogen is susceptible to the attraction to a new gravitational field. So we're not saying which field this is, and we're not saying which plasmatic condition that is. Okay, so there's things that we're not saying, we're just looking at trends. And so when we talk about field strength, we say, okay, well, the neutron is the gravitational. And by being gravitational, that means it's absorbing energy to increase its field strength. So the neutron field strength absorbs energy. And when you absorb energy, then you become more dense. And so we know the neutron is more dense than the proton. Okay, so the neutron has a higher field strength than the proton. Okay, well, this is normal physics, nothing wrong with that. And so one part of the physics that is really hard to understand is mass conversion. So mass and its relationship to energy has a really direct correlation. So what we've seen is that we can take plasma and convert the energy of plasma into a mass. And so we've seen the creation of solar field forces. And simultaneously, we've created Earth field forces. And we know that neutrons are additive. And we know that from the periodic table of elements, because we keep adding arithmetically one after the other after another, like carbon 6, nitrogen 7, oxygen 8. We just keep on going. And so this is all magnetic interaction of magnetico-gravitational field forces with this is based on plasmatic interaction of magnetico-gravitational field forces with respect to its environment. In other words, the mass conversion has a tendency to density. Well, small m matter conversion is working the same way, except we're doing a physical conversion of energy into small m matter state. And so the small m matter state is the weakest energy. So the higher strength is feeding the lower strength. What is happening? Well, the neutron is now decaying. Oh, wait a second. So as we decay the neutron, then it decays into something else. And that decay is the creation of the periodic table of elements. And so based on plasmatic interaction of gravitational magnetic field forces, and this is with respect to the environment, the tendency is again to more density. So we're having the same tendency to density. The difference is, in one case, the neutron is decaying, in another case, the neutron is additive. Okay, so we've got a little conflict here going, but that's okay, because you see, these conversions of energy are conditional, and so the environment is the condition. So we have an environmental conversion of energy into every other condition. So if we are decaying, we are creating elements. But we can take these elements and put them together as molecules. So by decaying, we create the elements, but by adding, we create the molecules. And so we could see that within that state, even the lowest small m matter state, neutrons may be additive or decaying. And so the same thing, it's based on plasmatic interaction of magnetico-gravitational field forces with respect to its environment. This is another pattern. Now, when we say with the table of elements, as we add each number, carbon 6, nitrogen 7, oxygen 8, the elements become more dense. And then as we add elements together, they become molecules, then they become more dense. But this is in the small m matter state. Is there such a thing as a table of molecular elements? Because that could be both in the small m matter state or the capital M matter state. So really, we need a new kind of table, a table of Gans, because you know what? Gans is less dense. It's like popcorn. And how come we have more energy in Gans, but it is less dense? So when we look at the new atomic mass, we found what was missing in the equation. When we looked at the mass of the neutron, we found that we were discounting something, and we are not in the banking business. We are in the plasma science business. So the mass of the neutron equals the mass of the proton and the electron. But we know that there was some loss of energy, and those were the PM ticks. And as these PM ticks are moving, we have a MAGRAV condition. And that MAGRAV condition is the combination of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. So the neutron math is now including the physical proton and electron, shall we say, or the mass of the PM ticks, which is energy in motion, and the mass of the MAGRAV, which is the matter, antimatter, and dark matter. This is the totality. This is the totality that is achieved through energy level balance and positioning. And so when you have these energy magravs based on field strength, based on nearness and proximity, they will maintain their positioning. So today's subject was about oxygen. And so we said that oxygen is kind of like hydrogen 8. So when we say hydrogen 8, hydrogen itself is an electron proton. But the thing about the hydrogen is it doesn't have a neutron. And we say, really, well, we call hydrogen 1. And we call oxygen 8. But the thing is, we call it 8 because it isn't based on the number of electrons, it's based on the number of protons. And with every proton, we have an electron. But because of the mass of the oxygen, it has an additional 8 electrons. So in fact, it has 16 electrons. So therefore, to keep those electrons in check, we have to add 8 neutrons. Okay, so 8 protons, 8 neutrons, 16 electrons. And so this is oxygen, and it comes in pairs, always comes in pairs. So it's oxygen 2. So take another form artifact that you see here, put it beside another form artifact, and see the link up between those two, but they are of the same size. So interestingly enough, if they're of the same size, then the charge is neutral. Oh, well, so all you have is energy coming and flowing, and energy going around to maintain its neutral position. So the energy coming in and the energy going out is equal. It's a balanced Magravs condition. But what happens if we split this oxygen apart? Well, one of the things that happens, we know, is we can create an amino acid. And the amino acid is a precursor to the creating of the DNA. And then from the DNA, we create the fatty acid. And so we understand that then we keep building and building that chain. When we exceed 3 and get into 4 plus 4, it folds over and forms an amino star, which is the building block of protein. And then we know that when we build protein, well, something funny happens. And that is, we create water. And this is what happens in the plasma science. It's a two-way street. You don't create something and then the other side you create garbage. That's not the way plasma works. You create something on one side, you create something on the other side, and there has to be a balance. So interestingly enough, to this picture, we add 2 hydrogens, but these hydrogens do not have a neutron, and so they are not very dense. And this is a Magravs. How is it possible that 2 hydrogens, tiny as they are, so if we say these 2 hydrogens are 1 plus 1, so that's 2, and then we say that oxygen is hydrogen 8, okay, so, but it's actually more than that because oxygen has 8 neutrons, and because it has 8 neutrons, it also has another 8 electrons. So it's even more dense. So this big fat oxygen is balanced off with 2 tiny little hydrogens. And we call this water. And this is the universal solvent, and it is why life on this planet is possible. And it has some characteristics. So I'm putting forward and saying the Gans of oxygen is water. And the reason for that is because water is physical. So we know that water being a universal solvent, being a maggrav, it's like an energy parceling unit, except it's a combination of H2O. So we said that's H, two H's and one oxygen. And one of those hydrogens gets sheared off in the process. It just gets knocked right off because water has an affinity for being a universal solvent. So that hydrogen is gone. I don't know where it's gone, but now we're short one hydrogen. So that becomes the negatively charged hydroxyl. And the hydroxyl is still a maggrav. So it was confounding that two hydrogens can balance off one oxygen. Well, guess what? One hydrogen can balance off one oxygen. But this is an energy pack looking for action, and energy is always in motion. And so one of the things that we like to do is we like to wash things. And so when we wash things, we balance things out. So we take clean water and we make dirty water. And we do it in so many different ways. We wash the dishes, we wash our cars, we wash ourselves, you know, and then we want to drink this water and water our plants and create life, and we've created quite a mess. So the reason I've gone down this path is because there is a Gans sequence, and so now we have, because of the past 20 months, we've stayed away from this subject, but the time is coming now to introduce the subject again, because CH3 is a Gans and CO2 is a Gans. And these are like molecules, because what molecules are is a combination of elements, except the mass is different. Well, excuse me, not the mass. The element atomic weight is different. Let's be specific. The atomic weight is different. So just like the atomic weight between carbon, which is 6, and nitrogen, which is 7. So we look at the atomic weight of the CO2 in the plasmatic is different from the atomic weight of CO2 in the physical. And so we've identified plasmatic elements, if you will, but they're not elements, because elements need to be elementary. And molecules are a combination of elements. So plasmatic molecules, CO2, carbon dioxide, CuO, copper oxide, ZNO, zinc oxide, and CaCO3. Oh, O3 again, calcium carbonate. Oh, and you look at those elements, none of them have hydrogen. But you look at the CH3 and it doesn't have oxygen. But you look at the water and the water has both oxygen and hydrogen. And how many times have people said to you, you know what? Water is water. Really? Well, water is not water. There is physical water and there is plasma water. And so the interesting thing about when we get into the physical water, we see that gas can be a gas, but gas can also be a liquid, because we're saying now that plasma water is a gas, so gas is a liquid. And of course we have the solid gas, which we call gas as a nanosolid. So we have a gas sequence through the Gans sequence. Gas is a gas is a liquid, gas is a solid. And this must be because we know that water goes through different phases. It is a gas, but it's a vapor. So when it becomes a gas, it's not the gas of oxygen or the gas of hydrogen, it's the gas of H2O. It's a water vapor. And when it's in a liquid, then it's a water, H2O. And when it's a solid, it's still H2O, but it is now ice. And it's, a lot more solid. So when we look at the water and how it's based on temperature, we find that the higher the temperature, the tendency is for the water to evaporate, right? So the water evaporates as a gas into vapor. So the reason the vapor is a gas is because it's less dense. So if the vapor is less dense, then the liquid must be more dense. And then we come to the solid, and the solid is less dense. What? So this is a characteristic of water that is unique in all the molecules, because all the molecules, when they become solid, they become more dense. And so this now, when we look at our ranges where we go up and down, the problem when we go up, we see there's snow on top of the mountain. And how can that be when the top of the mountain is closer to the sun, and we know the sun heats things up? And then down in the valley, you know, it's supposed to be cooler because it's farther away from the sun, but it's a liquid. And then so that we look at changes in our environment. And so we could say, well, these are related to temperature. So we find that when we go higher, we have a colder environment. So we have ice on top of the mountain. And when we go lower in altitude, then it becomes warmer. So that ice will become a liquid. But when we go towards the poles, it becomes colder and the water turns to ice. But when we go towards the equator, it becomes warmer, the water turns to liquid. But in the wintertime, it's colder and the water turns to ice. And then in the summertime, it gets warmer and the water turns to liquid. This looks something like the X, Y, and Z axis, doesn't it? This looks something like matter, antimatter, and dark matter. This looks something like your 3 dimensions: transmission, transition, and transmutation. So we have a density anomaly where the gas is less dense, the liquid is more dense, and the ice is less dense. And so this is kind of different from the way we see the Earth. And so this is a good thing because this puts a big smile on our face, you see, because this is why life is possible on this planet. This characteristic of the Gans of oxygen is what makes life possible on this planet. And so we said a long time ago how Gans flows in water. So we find that water can exchange energy. Water can give and take. Well, Gans gives and takes energy. And one of the ways that Gans exchanges energy is as a magnetical energy. And another way it exchanges energy is as a gravitational energy. So there is an affinity, similarity between water and Gans. So when we look at the Gans affinity, it gives and takes energy. And as a solid, it is on a physical plane, but as a gas, it's on an emotional plane. Gans is a gas as a nanosolid, and our body is a Gans spaceship. Okay, so we see that the life on this planet, we have vertical life and we have a horizontal life. And this is how we see life as part of the matter state. And because life wants to live. And so we've had a representation to the stacker unit, which we still haven't completed. But what we do know is that there's a feeding of energy from the higher to the lower. And it's not the highest to the lowest, but it's higher to all the lower. Okay, there's a continuous feeding. And you see that we're 75% water. So if we're bags of Gans, if our spaceship is full of Gans, and that Gans is 75% water, then you can see that water is not just water, but water is a Gans. And that is what's going on this planet. So there's a transformation that is going from the plasma state to the physical state. And so we see there's a comparative viewpoint with respect to the stacker units as if it was our spine. And so the energy in our spine flows out through our body. And that energy is also similarly transmutating within our cells. So we have a transformation of energy into our cells, and then the collection of our cells create a body which allows us to transport ourselves around this planet. So there are two transmutations, a transformation and a transportation. And this is the interaction point that I'm trying to make. When you see the infinity loop, it goes through transition and transmission. And so there's a convergent point in between where the energy that diverges converges with the energy that converges. And that is the dynamic transfer state. And there's a point of conversion. Which direction is it going? Well, when we're looking at the difference between plasma state and physical state, like we do between the plasma state of the sun and the plasma state of the earth, we find that there's an interaction point, and that is the conversion point, and that is the point that we're trying to figure out. And when we see our earth has figured it out, other elements in our life have figured it out. The periodic table of elements have figured it out. Gans has figured it out. We're just the ones that really don't understand that the way the earth operates is based on the plasmatic condition that is a substructure of the physicality that we have on this earth. So now we have to change our viewpoint or our understanding of certain terminologies. Now let's try and see if we can sort this out. Principal matter is the PM ticks, comes from the PM ticks, which are magnetical. These are energy packs. The energy packs are flowing all over the place, but when you get them to come together, they converge into a force field and they create a plasma condition. And this is the convergence which creates a mag-grav condition. And because the energy is coming into it, we say that that is a gravitational. Well, we're going to have to modify this a little bit because of what we talked about today. And we're going to see that if we're transmutating, then we're transmutating from a plasma field into a physical field. And so to avoid this confusion, let's change the antimatter to what we say was principal matter, the dark matter to the transition matter. Transition to what? To the conversion between the plasma, which is either physical, or the plasma, which is either non-tangible. And there's a convergence that comes together. And this convergence is the force field interaction, which we call inertia, and completes the gravitational field. So if we take this understanding and look at it at our point of view and saying, okay, so our soul has a partner. And so we have the soul of man and we have the soul of the body. So therefore we have two transmutations. One is the transformation and one is the transportation. But we have an anomaly between the Gans state, which is physical, and its emotional affinity, which is non-physical. So we have some skills to learn. And so let's just change this picture around a little bit. And so we see that the plasmatic transmutation is transformation. And we can still create an energy state, a plasmatic energy state within our range on this planet that is of a higher energy state than the physical state. So there's another transmutation down to our physical state. So in other words, let me repeat. There's a transmutation from the soul to the emotion, and there's a transmutation from the emotion to the physical. And these are skills that we have to learn. And that's why I said, if I give an idea, I don't have a hole in my head. And if I give love, I don't have a hole in my heart. And so these are energies in motion. We all have this capability. And now we're on the verge. We are on the verge of a breakthrough finally, because we have found that there's a problem in understanding what is physical and what is plasmatic and what is energy in motion and how that works. And so in our little two-dimensional world, as we're trying to convert things, I need to go through this review, because after 20 months, we haven't solved the problem yet on the world scale. Magnetical energy is attraction and repulsion. And when you have a creation of a field, that is a maggraph. And to retain that field, energy comes and goes. And if more energy goes, that's magnetical. And if more energy comes, that's gravitational. So that's where you have the attraction and repulsion. And this is the energy that is going on in the cups of life. And we need these cups of life because we are still having problems on this planet. Understand that we have in the one cup, the zinc plate and the copper coil and a nano-coated copper coil, and there are fields. One field is magnetical, one field is gravitational. So there's an interaction between these three components in the cups, and we've introduced another field, Gans. This Gans comes from the, shall we say, the fat air, not the thin air, the fat air. We call it Gans. We have zinc Gans, copper Gans. From those two, we produce the CO2 Gans. And we've said, so we produce the amino acid. When we produce the amino acid, we produce the Gans of oxygen, which is water. And in the second cup, we introduced calcium carbonate. Forgot about that one. So there's a whole lot going on here. Very, very busy. And in the second cup, we only change one thing. We change the copper plate. And what does that do? Same reaction, magnetical field, gravitational field. So these two cups kind of look the same, but because of the density, one is emotional, one is physical. So the physical is more dense. Well, I said, oh, wait a second, more dense is gravitational. Wait a second. More dense is gravitational towards the physical. More dense is gravitational towards the emotional, which is a plasmatic condition. So the density of the plasmatic condition is different from the density of the physical condition. So we have the one word with two different meanings. Okay, so how do we know this? Because we have to keep the cups apart, because the plasma condition does not see the physical condition. So there's a magnetical field and a gravitational field, and then this field goes beyond the physical diameter of the cup. A moment, please. Hang in there, folks. We're coming to the punchline. The virus is not physical. It's plasmatic. So it's energy in motion. And we can do two things. We can deplete the energy, or we can convert the energy to food. This is a skill that we have to understand. There's always a relationship. It's a mag-grav relationship, which is the balance between the magnetical and gravitational fields. And we're trying to do the same thing with the scientific and the spiritual world. If we can add the two together, discount whatever is missing, and just change the terminology so we understand what it means to manifest. We understand that our cells are manifested. We understand that the plasma is manifested. There's a conversion between our souls and our physicality, and the light is the carrier. So we see there's a relationship in the cups of man. The emotional is the gravitational taker. The physical is the magnetical giver. And they create a maggrav condition, and therefore they create a balance between the magnetical and gravitational fields. And this is a representation of us, humans who have a soul. And so we introduced the cup of soul. So we have the third dimension, X, Y, and Z, a low magnetic field in each one, gravitational field in each one, soul in each one. The combination of the three create a star formation with an interaction of fields, magnetical, gravitational fields, and a soul. And then that's us. Where are we? We're in an environment, and we interact. Before we get into that environment, we have the cup of inertia, and that involves a nano-coated copper coil, another nano-coated copper coil, and a nano-coated copper plate. Slightly different components. Same reaction, magnetical field, gravitational field, and we add that to our stacker unit, right? And of course, we increase the strength of our star formation and make it into a pyramid. We're still missing one cup of life from this sequence, and we'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, someone asks you, well, what is plasma? Tell them straight up. Plasma is a kind of energy state, okay? And it's pretty important. And why? Because look at what's happening on this planet. You see, all things are in combination, and all things are facing the same magnetical pushing and pulling, and there's a corresponding gravitational pulling and pushing. And so we're trying to seek a balance in our maggrav condition. And it doesn't matter if you're in Europe or you're in North America or you're in Asia, we are affected by this thing. It's a worldwide problem. And so the worldwide problems involves a certain kind of ethics. And the reason for this is because the universal energy is bound to the ethics of the universe. It involves morality, it involves compassion and courage. These are the essences of creation. And so we have a unique structure, a universal body enhancement spaceship unit, which is now introducing plasma conversion. Conversion of what? The conversion and the restoration of our emotional and physical vitality. And so we understand that we're breaking a lot of barriers. And today, one of the things that I like to add to the pile is a little bit of history. And I mean a very little bit of history, because it affects our reality. You see, our reality is really a perception, and that perception is the manifestation of the reality. So the manifestation of reality is when two fields come together, they form another. And this formation of any fields is what we call manifestation. So it's the plasma feeding which leads to this manifestation. But this manifestation may be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible, plasmatic or physical. And so we have a dark matter, we must have a light matter. And so there's a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. Whichever reality it is, that is a form artifact. So the manifestation is the form artifact. And one of the form artifacts of energy in motion is the emotion of presence. But we can't see that. So this is where archaeologists have problems. So as we excavate our ruins, humanity's ruins of many societies, which, you know, it's interesting, in Babylon, they've gone through 9 different layers of ruins, all right? And in the bottom layer, the farthest one down, they've discovered nuclear residue. Something wrong with that picture. Now, if you look at these ceramics, they make nice cups, coffee cups, tea cups, soup cups, but these come from the Keshe Foundation and they are impregnated with Gans. So what are you looking at? What you're looking at is a physical form artifact of a ceramic cup infused with Gans. What you can't see is the plasmatic energy field that is created inside the cup. So we find that the plasma feeding is coming to a certain point. And so that is the physical destination state. But at some point, there has to be a transfer state. And we talked about that last week, the dynamic transfer state. So that's why we have a transmutation between the plasma state and the physical state, which we call the transformation inertia. But, you know, we also have, we have a relationship here to the transportation of the plasma physics. The transportation of our plasma physics is our body. And so when we look at the cups of life, we see that really, when we get into the physicality, it's the bottom 2 cups which are really focusing on that. It's the top 3 cups in the stacker unit, which are concentrating on our plasma essence. And this is something that we have to understand as we look at the cups of life as a physical manifestation. We have to understand that the soul transmutation is involving transformation to our brain and the body transportation, and both involve inertia, and both have a similar construct, similar interaction as the sun to the earth. So we found that our vision, our soul vision, is the focal point between the physical, what we see physically with our eyes, which is then interpreted at our focal point, which is the soul in our brain, and then it is transformed by our eyes into our physicality. And from our physicality, it goes from the medulla to the rest of the body. There's a problem. There's a problem. We seem to have a disconnect where what we see is what we believe. So our soul of man sees with his eyes, processes with his brain, but the brain is a transmutation from the soul to the brain. And so there we have a transformation into a physical brain. And then we have the soul of the body, which takes the context of our environment as interpreted by the medulla and creates our body, which is our transport mechanism. And somehow our soul of our body is not connected to the soul of the man. And the extreme cases we call a coma. And so there can be a physical reason for having a coma, because that causes a kind of disconnect. But we have a plasmatic coma, which is causing another kind of disconnect, because we have supplanted man-made law for universal law. And so this is our vision. We have a transformation which creates our brain, and a transportation which creates our body, and this is created from the inertia. But what is going on here? There is a feedback loop. So we come from the gravitational, we go to the magnetical. In between is the conversion. So therefore, the feedback loop is coming from the gravitational portion of the environment, coming to the magnetical, which is interacting with our soul. And so we find that there are different levels of energy here. One is the transformation of our soul vision, and the other is the transportation of our body. And there's an in-between. And somehow it's not connected. Well, it doesn't appear to be connected, but it actually is connected. And this is where the advanced teaching is going, to understand this connection and the reaction between. And so bear in mind, there's a giving and taking. But when we do energy binding, which is self-serving at the other people's expense, the reason we can do this is because we take these two energies and we double talk, we double cross, we deceive. And so this becomes the question. On this, the eve of the World Peace Treaty, we have to ask ourselves a question, because we have a dilemma with this duality. Can the mortal man be an immoral man? Yes, it can. We're doing a great job. Can an immoral man be an immortal man? No. It's the universal law of the ethos of the universe. Oh, just a moment. Which way did we go? Oh, of course. Can a mortal man this is wrong. Can a moral man be an immortal man? The new science says yes. The universal law says yes. Can a mortal man be a moral man? We need to sign the World Peace Treaty. That is the mandate of the Universal Council. And we are just messengers of peace and friendship. That's what we have to do. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. We put this plasma science in public domain. And to understand that the World Peace Treaty is mandatory if we want to participate with the rest of the universe, if we are looking for physical and emotional harmony and vitality. If we understand this, then we understand the truth. And when we understand the truth, we need to act upon that truth and become the difference makers. This is the dynamic plasma state that's not only within us, but is throughout the universe. Plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Thank you for allowing me to make this presentation. August the 3rd is the anniversary of the World Peace Treaty, and we need to get this thing going. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. And as Mr. Kesh said, this table of elements is going to get opened up to 3 digits or perhaps 4 digits, he said. That means we're in the thousands of elements. Many, of course, have not been, man is not aware of at this point. Would someone like to ask a question or open it up or get things started?
Yes, today I need to talk with Mr. Alex. First of all, I'm so glad that he still has the energy to teach us and to give from his soul. And I kindly ask him if he would like to collaborate with the Romanian team, because we are waiting for him. If he feel like this, Mr. Kesh just encourage Mr. Alex to come and join our team and help our team to elevate. I have 2 questions. One is from a Romanian team. From my last lesson, it is related to volume to surface to volume ratio. And they didn't understand why the smallest is strongest than the bigger. And to give an example with hydrogen and oxygen, maybe you can explain and I can show next time to Romanian team if you are not able to come, and if you are able to come, you will be more than welcome. And the second is not a question, is a proposal. Maybe you can put in your presentation the definition of the inertia of the environment made by Mr. Kesh last time. He said that inertia is the soul of the creator. And it was also my question to him, and he tried to answer, but he didn't finish to answer. Maybe another time he will elaborate more on this. He just suggests me to listen, and I will understand that inertia of the environment is the soul of the creator. So the soul of the creator transform, convert, transmute energy in mass. It's like the particle of God, boson Higgs, something like this. Anyway, thank you very much, and I am waiting for your answer.
Maybe Adrian would like
Thank you very much for your question.
Maybe Adrian would like to comment on that. And of course, if Alex does do any teaching, he'll have to receive the same fee as he receives in the other nations for teaching. Isn't that true, Alex? Your fee is pretty stable.
So let me answer the one of the direct questions with respect to understanding. This is a scientific rule. The hydrogen is just negative, and the higher the negative charge, the higher the energy. That's a plasmatic rule. It's by convention, and it's just something that has to be done because of the confusion between science, electronics, and the automotive industry. So people get confused, with respect to which way the fields are flowing. So there has to be a convention of understanding. And because energy is always positive, so the energy has to be given before it can be taken. And so it's not the energy that's positive, or the positive is the taker. As far as the others are going, that the other parts of the question, it has to do with the education department with the Kesh Foundation, and I've answered this question before, so I'll just refer to that answer again. If the classes are organized by the educational department, and if I'm available, then I'd be very happy to participate. I'm a knowledge seeker of the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute, and that's my primary goal, is to establish peace on this planet. And the teachings that I'm trying to do is to bridge between the phenomenal teaching that Mr. Kesh is putting forward and the old science, which is very valuable, but the understanding of it in many ways is holding us back. So we've had to break a lot of the boundaries. So, maybe I need to put the boson Higgs or the Higgs boson or whatever, put that on the same pile with all the other barriers that we need to break, which is one of the reasons why we keep referring to the cups of life and how the fields interact. That is the basis of energy and motion. And so that's the direction that we're headed into. So the sooner we understand the difference between the plasmatic reality and the physical reality, the sooner we can move ahead. And the time is coming where we need to bring peace on this planet, because that's what it's all about, you see. And thank you for your question.
Me too. I thank you. I just received in January answer from a educational department from Kesh Foundation, and they said this it's okay. We have just to have your approval, and if you are available to come one day in a week, depends on you to teach us. And they also ask if we have a host. An official host.
Well, yes, that's exactly it. And you have been participating with the Spanish community as well. And I'm in the middle of classes with that. So it's, there's only so many hours in the day. So I'm a little bit overloaded with that. However, we are going through the process of getting the transcripts organized, and all the classes have been redone in terms of the basic classes, the first 21 classes. And so that'll be something that the Romanian community can coordinate with the educational department. And I hope to have that actually this week. I hope to have parts of that available so that the Romanian community, if they wish to proceed with that, they have that capability. So I'm working on it. It's been very time consuming, but we see a light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you.
Yeah, I am very happy with your teaching, and with Jalal teaching also. He helped us in the past, but you made a synthesis and you tried to make the link between the science, this old science and new science. And this is interesting from my point of view. I start to prepare some lessons from Kiev TV, and I was very enthusiastic in the beginning, and I proposed your classes. I said I prefer Mr. Alex classes. And we had another project with from Australia. What is the name? I forgot. Lisa. And I think that both are complementary. It's okay. So I hope that for the Kiev TV, we can have classes inspired from your teaching. I am a professor myself, and I can tell you that I like your method of teaching, your curriculum, and your kindness and softness. And you have a lot of time and passion to explain to everybody. And I appreciate very much, Vex. Thank you very much.
Very kind words. Thank you very much. Must reiterate that I'm not part of the Universal Council. I am actually too old, but I, as I say, these teachings are part of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. And so it's through the Universal Council members that these get organized through the various Keshe Foundation organizations. And also please understand that the teachings that are coming from Australia are coming from the Earth Council. And so these are also quite sophisticated classes. So each one has his own desire and his own style. But, you know, please understand that I make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes these mistakes are done on purpose, because if you don't catch the mistake, that means you don't understand what I'm talking about. And I found in the conventional science and whether it's in a university or, you know, especially on social media, you know, there's no checks and balances there. In the universal fields, we have checks and balances. It's just that in the physicality, we have a delay in consequences, so we don't see the immediate results of these checks and balances. And so what I'm trying to do is to, and especially today, is to show that when we look at certain conventions and how things work in physics, we are assuming certain things, and we're only taking into consideration maybe one or two dimensions. So when we're looking at the plasmatic construct and we see that it's say in 3 dimensions, and because we are the observers and we are the participants, so we can be part of the 3 dimensions, but we also have to be part of another dimension, and that's not to necessarily specify a 4th dimension. We haven't specified how many dimensions. We haven't specified the speed of light. We haven't specified the mass, and we haven't specified the environment. So all of these things need to be taken into account. How do you do that when you have 7 billion people on this planet who haven't heard about this technology or haven't been allowed to hear about this technology? And you say, well, we've made tremendous strides. Okay, so yeah, we're into the hundreds of millions of knowledge seekers. It's 3 orders of magnitude less than, you know, a billion. Well, actually, it's not. It's only 1 order of magnitude. We're very close. And the physical energy, for instance, me as a teacher, Jalal as a teacher, is limited. It's the lowest energy form. And the way Liliana is working and Mark is working with the plasma dome is in a higher energy state. And I must say that we've made tremendous progress in the Spanish group, especially recently. And what's made difficult in the Spanish group is that it involves a lot of countries. And so there's a European mentality and there's a American mentality, and they seem to be quite different. And so it you know, we come into certain conflicts. And if that isn't bad enough, there's a North American and there's a South American conflict as well. The Spanish community is very much a part of the North American community. And so we see the 2 main leaders there, Victor and Liliana. One is from Europe and one is from Mexico. And they're the glue that keeps everything together and going. And why I'm commenting on this is because we've had a reluctance to leave the physical state. We've had a reluctance to expand our understanding because we don't know how to differentiate between what is physical and what is plasmatic. So if we look at the extreme and we say, well, listen, love is plasmatic. Try and grab it, try and put it in a bag. You know, you can't do it. And you know, you can't force someone to love you. And you can't force yourself to love someone else. Because the moment you force, that's a physical action. And the plasma doesn't see the physical action. This is why we have this disconnect. This is why when we see something, we see it in its physicality. And when we interpret it, we apply the words to it. The universal community doesn't see what we see. They see our soul. They don't say the things that we say. They don't have words. They don't need words. If I can see what your soul intention is, then I have all the communication that I need. And we are not skillful enough to do this. And I'm not pointing to any one individual. It's collective. We have a collective soul on this planet, and that soul is disconnected from our plasmatic soul. And it needs to be reconnected because that's how we operate. And we have too small a scheme on this too small a planet. And when I say too small, I'm talking about the environment. I'm not talking about overpopulation. So we don't have enough, shall we say, souls to carry on and do the job. And however, things are changing. And the reason that things are changing is because the environment is changing. And which environment are we talking about? I didn't say, was it the plasmatic environment? Was it the physical environment? If we're talking about inertia, then we could be talking about the transmutation from the plasmatic field into the plasmatic environment. And then if we're talking about the physical manifestation, then we could be talking about the plasmatic transmutation into the physical environment. Okay, so when we say environment, it's general. It's just like a car. It's just like the soul. It's just like your emotion, and it's just like your physicality. And so somehow, some way, energy is moving. We need to understand this better, and we need to work with the universe as opposed to dictate to the universe. And the only reason we dictate to the universe is because we are not tuned in to the moral code of the universe. We have an immorality on this planet, and this immorality is limiting our mortality. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Anyone else would like to come in here? I was just making a funny, Alex. As I said, if we doubled your fee, would you take it under consideration to teach in Romania?
What I might consider is sharing it with Jalal.
Excellent, excellent.
And that way I could go to sleep.
Going to spread the wealth. But if we double the fee, 2 times 0 is, if it's neutron math, it's still 0, right?
That's it. You got her.
Well, thank you so much for all you're doing, as well as Jalal and all the other teachers. As Mr. Kesh said, we're all students and we're all teachers. Some can teach more in depth and some teach just what they think they understand. So no one should be afraid to teach or share. I like to refer to it as sharing. That way it's a little bit more disarming for someone to receive rather than say, I'm going to teach you. And Danilo asks, Alex, is the soul of physicality what people see as a ghost?
Danilo, you know, there's something about our dream state. Okay, this is just like the Gans I talked about, dropping one, picking up another. Well, that's how we go into the dream state. We drop our physicality and go to a higher energy state. And when we're in our dream state, we can travel full of energy. And we'll say, well, how come when we're dreaming, we have all this energy and yet we're so tired that we have to go to sleep? And that is the difference between the physicality and the plasma reality. When we see a ghost, it's actually stuck. It's stuck in between. And it's neither here nor there. And the reason for it is because it has this strong gravitational pull to the physicality, and it has been abused. It hasn't been able to be released. Imagine, for instance, and it's a terrible thing to imagine, but you know, you're a soldier preparing for war, and you know, to be inspired to fight, you know, you have to build up your emotion, and so now you're all set. You have plans on how to be destructive. As I say in one of the video games, your assignment is to destroy the other. Well, is that the only option? You know, I'd like to see some little variety in here. Maybe your assignment is to help the other, but that never happens, okay? And that's got to change. And so as you go into the battle, and then bullet hits you in the forehead, and you haven't even fired your gun, and you're already in your dream state, but you have all this energy pent up to fulfill your mission. And so away you go with the rest of the soldiers, but you don't have a physical body to go with you. It becomes very confusing. And this has been a lot of problems for a lot of souls, because they haven't understood how the physicality works. And so they have operated in violation of their soul. And the universal rule is that life wants to live. If life wants to live and you are opposing that, then you're opposing the universal law. And this creates a real problem with the soul. So not only for you as a soldier, but even worse for the commander who orders you into the battle. And it isn't just a commander, because he's following orders as well. And so this is all follows a different law, a man-made law, a law of diminishing returns. And that's not the way the universe works. The universe is benevolent. The energy is bountiful. So the poor ghost is stuck. It needs to go somewhere. Just tell it to go. Tell it it's free. Give it the energy that it needs to make that final leap. One of the reasons that many are coming back, and I can't even vouch if this is factual, I don't know. I am, like my classes, putting all the pieces together to try and come up with a mental construct that makes sense. And the way I do it is to take away things that don't make sense. And then you look at what's left over, and then you can ask the right questions. So we see that the way we've been conducting ourselves is violating universal principles, because it's not working. And we cannot entertain the universal community, because the universal community is not interested in entertaining hooligans. So it's up to us. And there is a change. And it is because of this change and this energy that is being emitted magnetically, plasmatically, is being received, absorbed by the universal community. And the reserves are coming. And the reason the reserves are coming is because we're not the only ones that have this problem. And, you know, the thing is, we're all created equal. So this hierarchy of a command structure, like let's say in a military or in a religion or in a caste system or in a socioeconomic system, this hierarchy, you know, how can you have a hierarchy if we're all created equal? So that's a false construct. So it's just another thing to throw on the pile of barriers and eliminate these barriers and get the energy flowing. And that's what we need to do. And we can do this by bringing peace on this planet. August the 3rd, the World Peace Treaty anniversary.
And tomorrow, Randy indicated that it's Mr. Kesh's birthday. He's actually, Randy has given me a birthday card to put up. I believe it's tomorrow. Is that right, Randy? If you're still with us.
Yes, on the records I found, tomorrow was his birthday.
Excellent. What a birthday present to start off with the new administration in Iran and all the work that's being put in. And he said it's very fit for this type of knowledge to be delivered.
I hope I answered your question, Danilo. And thank you very much for allowing me to make this presentation today. It's taken a lot of energy, but there's more where that came from.
So man science talks about the initial fundamental particle, and we talk about the initial fundamental plasma. Is that right? Or are we talking a particle as well? When the PM ticks come together and create this initial fundamental plasma.
No, Mark, you were right.
So the Higgs boson is the atom, or is that what they're talking as the initial fundamental particle, where we're talking the fields around the atom as the point of creation?
It's the highest of the BMTs which make the maps, and this is the principle.
That's right, Joel. You see, we're still trying to relate to the physics, the physical physics, and we need to stop doing that, because our understanding in the physics is based on collision theory. So the way the universe works is things working in combination. So this is what we have to we have to understand how energy moves, how energy is combined, and how we can move up and down the scale. It's like looking at a piano keyboard and trying to say, well, which is the originating key, and which direction are you going? Well, you know, if you're playing in the low notes, you're in the low range. If you're playing in the high notes, you're in the high range. All the keys are the same. Okay, so how you play on the piano is just based on your skill, you know. So you can't say, oh, you know, middle C is, you know, the origin. No, it's not. It's a point of, it could be a point of inflection, and you say, well, above C is higher notes and below C is lower notes. Just like on a pH of 7, higher is, you know, above 7, and lower acidic is below 7. So you could say that, you know, as a point of reference, if you will. However, is the highest note on the piano the highest note? Is the highest pH the highest pH? Is the maximum speed of light in our physicality the highest speed? So within that range, yes, it is. Change the environment, you have to change the condition. And how do we know that? Hello, you were born. And, you know, I don't know how I got here is no longer an acceptable answer. And I don't know where I'm going. And, you know, that's, you know, a reasonable thing, because then you would be able to predict the future. But do you have a say in the future? Yes, you do. And so we look at our society and we say, someone else is controlling our future. Well, in many ways, because we're limiting our schemes of reference. So if we can expand our schemes of reference, we will find that we will take other things into account. And then the whole viewpoint changes. And this is the beauty of the plasma science. What you give your time and attention to is what you will manifest. It's very simple. So that's why you can't play poker in outer space. And that's one of the reasons I quit playing poker, because then I would have to spend my time and energy with people who want to do nothing but lie, cheat, and steal. And if I spend all my time with people who lie, cheat, and steal, then the tendency would be for me to be the same way. And it was against my basic nature. So as we discover our basic nature, then we govern ourselves accordingly. We govern ourselves accordingly. Who wrote those rules? And now we understand where the science meets the soul of man for peace, because there are universal rules, because that's how the universe is created. And that's how the universe will co-create and procreate and progress. And the future is as bright as you want it to be. Over to you, Mark.
Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or add to the knowledge today? I want to thank you very much, Alex. I know it's getting late in Europe. Not too late, but it's getting later. I don't see Mr. Kesh here today, but he could be under another cover, as he says many times. And of course, he's with us on the, always with us on the soul level. I have found the, which Randy provided me, the a bit of an excerpt from the Portuguese public teaching, where Marius did make a presentation. Dan has asked me to start it at minute 55. But before we go to that and end the meeting, followed by the final disclaimer, does anyone else want to add something or share something they've come up with? Or a question for Alex? I know he's talked for over an hour. Steadily. But he's willing to serve more.
Hi.
Hello, Selena.
I want to say something about hide and seek playing. I saw when my children were small, though they used to play hide and seek with other children. So my older daughter, most of time when one person is looking for all children, right? Everybody is hiding on the cabinet and the bathroom, garage, and everywhere, right? So my older daughter used to do, if I was cooking in the kitchen or doing something in the table, in the kitchen table. So she sits beside me when they are playing. One is looking for everybody, but she is sitting in front of me, maybe eating cereal or doing something. But who is looking for other children? They never, they're so hyper, they're running and everywhere going, but they never see another one is sitting in front of me or near me. So our situation like this, we are hyper and running everywhere. So we are not seeing the situation and we are not finding our goal. Like we are the hyper children. I don't know, I can I didn't explain well, but
no, you explained it great. That was absolutely great.
Thank you. Yeah, that is happening to us. That's it.
Anyone else? Feel free to open your mic. We're all equal in this meeting. So if you'd like to say something or add something, please feel free.
Mark, I want to say hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, dear, go right ahead.
Hello.
Yes, you put a beautiful comment, a couple comments in there for Alex.
I wanted to say, Alex, Alex, you are a beautiful soul, and these are gifts you have given to us, and we are transformed so much, so much. I cannot even, as you say, I cannot even find words for that. No architect-like word for that. So it's a heart-to-heart saying, a heart-to-heart feeling, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul. And that is what I'm, a knowledge seeker, a beautiful teacher you are. So much knowledge, so much enlightenment, always, forever. So, as a man of morale, you are a universal being, my dear Alex. So, in a way, in this unified field, we are all with you, and we have received the love from you and everybody, every other teachers like Moshfik, Jalal, all, Murray. We are all so gifted. I will use the word fortunate this time. This is a very physical word, but I will say this time we are very fortunate, kind of, in a way, in the level of understanding, to be in this dynamic fields of the universal creator with you as a teacher, as a giver. And thank you so much. Thank you. Salam. Salam alaikum. Shashwat pranam. Salute. Thank you.
Thank you, Shweta. You have, you're at the bottom of Mount Everest. You have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
And we will accomplish it.
Yes. We will. We all will. Of course, there are difficulties, but as we know how energy works, we can diverge and converge. As we learn from you, dear Alex, in a way that it will benefit for all in a collective. Thank you so much.
And Lissy had put in the chat earlier, please remember, Azerbaijan, everybody should be present this Tuesday for the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for world peace. It doesn't matter what language you speak, even if you don't understand English, you can attend. And I think Mr. Kesh made a request of the Universal Council to begin and to elevate the souls of the new leadership in Iran to see peace in a higher dimension and a better understanding of peace. So we can all help the Universal Council and support them in this endeavor. And hopefully we'll all see you there. Lissy, you have your hand up. Would you like to make a comment, please?
Okay, but I have other invitation, please. My English, do you know, is not perfect, but intense. It's, you know, Patricia or Dan help me. It's okay?
Yes, Dan?
Okay. Okay, Dan, are you here? Okay, Mr. Casey's birthday yesterday, but birthday is starting at midnight this day, no? 12 o'clock. Yes?
Yes,
Of course.
for
Okay.
Central European time is passing half an hour, 1 hour and half.
Around, okay.
Oh,
My
okay.
invitation is that time is exactly 12 at midnight. All us, nosotros todos nos unamos nuestra alma con la de él para que todo lo que se programe en este nuevo año, que Mr. Case programe, tenga éxito para todo el universo, para toda la humanidad.
For everybody in
Understand me?
the same time, in the same, yes, in the same time, all of us to making this wish, to put in the intention all together for, let's say, new beginning for birthday of Mr. Cash. No, in the new cycle, let's say.
From the old souls, no? All souls.
Yes, Lizzie. Thank you. I am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great time is coming, and tomorrow is my Masaya Shriman and Takesh's birthday, or we can say an enlightened soul in a way appeared for us, for the upliftment of humanity and the great transformation as an administration and the whole world, all the governments has to follow under the World Peace Treaty, and they want or they don't want. This is about now about the transition of humanity into the beauty and totality in a way. Thank you, Lizzie. I am present and we are present. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody for coming today, and thank you so much for your souls.
Thank you, dearest Lizzie. We are always in resonance. Much love to you. Thank you.